Ethan Carter and I had been together for 3 years. He was everything I thought I wanted: successful, charming, and from a well-established family. His mother, Margaret, had become like a second mother to me, filling the void left by my parents' passing. His sister Olivia was the best friend I never had. Everything seemed perfect, or so I believed. The night before our wedding, his bachelor party was at the Regency Hotel, just down the street from our penthouse. I hadn't planned on going there, but I had forgotten to give Ethan his late grandfather's cufflinks, a sentimental request from Margaret for the ceremony. The hotel staff knew me well. Ethan and I had hosted numerous charity events there, so no one questioned me as I made my way to the private lounge. That's when I heard it. Ethan's distinctive laugh, followed by a comment that shattered everything I thought I knew. "Come on, man. You can't be serious about settling down with Lily." His best friend Jason scoffed. "Why not? She's perfect on paper," Ethan replied, his words slightly slurred. "Her trust fund will help expand Carter Enterprises, and her connections are invaluable. Besides, she's completely devoted to me." Laughter erupted, but Ethan's next words made my blood run cold. "She's just temporary anyway. Until someone better comes along. Someone more suitable for the long term." I stood frozen, clutching the velvet box containing the cufflinks, my world unraveling in an instant. 3 years of memories replayed in my mind, now laced with betrayal. The late-night business calls, the unexpected cancellations, the subtle ways he manipulated my decisions. It all made sense now. But I didn't cry. A strange calm settled over me. I returned home, opened my laptop, and logged into Ethan's business accounts. As his partner, I had access to everything: emails, financial records, client information. For hours later, I had enough evidence to destroy not just his heart but his entire carefully constructed world. The morning of the wedding arrived, and my hands didn't tremble as I applied my makeup. The evidence I had gathered was neatly tucked inside a cream-colored envelope, hidden safely in my wedding suite. Margaret burst into the room, her eyes glistening with motherly pride. "Lily, darling, the flowers just arrived, and they're absolutely perfect," she beamed, holding up my bouquet of white peonies and blush roses, unaware that today they would serve as more than just decoration. My bridesmaids fluttered around me in their champagne-colored dresses. I caught Olivia's reflection in the mirror as she adjusted my veil. "I can't believe my brother got so lucky," she whispered, squeezing my shoulders. "He's going to be speechless when he sees you." If only she knew how right she was. The next hour passed in a blur: lipstick touches, final adjustments, champagne toasts. I avoided drinking. Every notification on my phone made my heart pound, not from pre-wedding nerves, but from anticipation of what was about to unfold. My private investigator had confirmed everything. At 11:43 a.m., the final text arrived. "Additional evidence secured. Reporter is in position." I excused myself to the bathroom, phone clutched in my hands. The screenshots confirmed it all: Ethan's offshore accounts, the embezzled company funds, and most damningly, his emails to his mistress discussing their post-honeymoon plans. The same mistress who, ironically, sat on his company's board of directors. A knock at the door startled me. "Lily, the coordinator says we have 30 minutes. Olivia called out. "Just finishing up," I responded, steady despite the storm brewing inside me. I took one last look at myself in the mirror. The woman staring back wasn't the one who had spent yesterday morning writing her vows with joyful tears. This woman wore her wedding dress like armor, her red lipstick like war paint. When I emerged, Margaret pulled me aside. "I want you to have this," she said, fastening a delicate pearl necklace around my neck. "It's been in the Carter family for generations. Ethan's grandmother wore it on her wedding day." The pearls felt like ice against my skin, another relic that would soon become collateral damage. "Thank you, Margaret," I whispered, hugging her tightly. "No matter what happens today, I want you to know that you've been more of a mother to me than I could have ever hoped for." She looked at me curiously, but before she could speak, the wedding planner appeared. "Places, everyone. Guests are seated. The groom is at the altar." My bridesmaids lined up, excitement bubbling around them. Olivia kissed my cheek before taking her place. I waited until they had all left before retrieving the envelope from its hiding place and slipping it into a discreet pocket sewn into my dress. The heavy church doors closed behind them, leaving me alone in the vestibule. Through the thick wood, I could hear the string quartet playing Pachelbel's canon, The same song Ethan and I had chosen together on a rainy Sunday months ago. My phone buzzed one final time. Reporter and photographer in position. Business partners all present. Police contact on standby. I deleted the message and tucked the phone away. The wedding coordinator appeared beside me, radiant with professional cheerfulness. "Ready, Miss Harper?" I thought back to the first time I met Ethan at a charity gala. How his dazzling smile had lit up the room. I thought of our first kiss in the rain, the way he had proposed under the stars in Santorini, the dreams we had built together. Then I thought of his cruel laughter last night, the years of manipulation, the deception so carefully disguised as love. The church doors swung open. The wedding march began, and 200 guests rose to their feet. At the end of the aisle, Ethan stood tall, radiating charm, his smile proud and unwavering. He had no idea that in less than 5 minutes, that smile would shatter along with his reputation, his business, and the world he had so carefully constructed. I took my first step forward, gripping my bouquet. The weight of the envelope pressed against my thigh, grounding me. This wasn't a wedding march. This was the countdown to his downfall. "Yes," I told the coordinator, my voice smooth as silk. "I'm ready." The weight of my steps down the aisle felt different than I had imagined. Instead of nerves, I felt power surging through me. I had always envisioned this moment as one of love and devotion, but now it was a march toward justice. Ethan's eyes sparkled with practiced affection as I approached the altar, his posture confident. He thought he had already won, that I was completely his. He had no idea his kingdom was seconds away from burning to the ground. The priest began to speak, his voice warm and familiar. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." I raised my hand gently, cutting him off. A hush fell over the crowd as I turned, not to Ethan, but to the guests before me. "Before we begin, I have something I need to share." The murmurs started immediately. Ethan's smile faltered just slightly, but he kept his cool. He had always been a master manipulator, skilled at twisting any situation in his favor. "Lily, what are you doing?" he whispered, his grip tightening around my hand. I pulled away smoothly, reaching into my dress pocket for the envelope. The crisp sound of the paper unfolding echoed through the vast church as I held it up for everyone to see. "Ethan Carter is a liar and a fraud," I declared, my voice steady and unwavering. "And today I will prove it." Gasps rippled through the audience. Margaret, his mother, stood up in confusion, while Olivia's mouth fell open. Ethan's friends in the front row exchanged uneasy glances, already sensing that their golden boy was about to fall. I pulled out the first document and began to read. "Email exchange between Ethan Carter and Rebecca Lane dated 2 months ago," I announced. "Once the wedding is done and Lily's assets are merged, we'll proceed with the buyout. She'll never see it coming." Silence. Then chaos. Margaret's hand flew to her mouth, horror dawning on her face. Olivia turned to her brother, betrayal written across her features. Ethan, for the first time since I had met him, was speechless. But I wasn't done. I tossed another paper forward. Financial statements showing offshore accounts. Funds transferred from Carter Enterprises under falsified expenses. I turned to Ethan, my gaze piercing. "Care to explain these, darling?" His jaw clenched. "Lily, let's not do this here. We can talk about this privately." "Privately?" I let out a bitter laugh. "Like how you privately plan to take everything I have. Like how you privately laughed at me with your friends."
"No, Ethan.
You built your life on deception. It's time the world sees you for who you really are." The doors at the back of the church creaked open. 2 men in suits entered, officials from the Securities and Exchange Commission, accompanied by 2 police officers. Right on cue. "Ethan Carter?" one of the agents called out, stepping forward. "We need to have a word with you." The panic on his face was exquisite. He looked around, searching for an escape, for an ally, anyone who would save him. But there was no one. Rebecca, his so-called business partner, had already slipped out of the building the moment I started reading. Jason had gone pale, clearly debating whether to distance himself immediately. "I believe you'll find the evidence you need in these," I said, handing the envelope to the agent. "I took the liberty of organizing everything for you." "Thank you, Miss Harper." The agent nodded, flipping through the documents. "You've saved us months of investigation." Ethan turned to his mother, desperation leaking into his expression. "Mom, please, you have to believe me." But Margaret's face was stone cold. "How could you?" After everything. How could you do this to her? To us. The police stepped forward. Mr. Carter, you're under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes. You have the right to remain silent. Ethan lunged toward me. You think you've won? He hissed, his voice shaking. You think this makes you strong? I met his gaze head-on, my lips curling into a victorious smile. I don't think, Ethan. I know. As the officers cuffed him and led him out of the church, cameras flashed, capturing the downfall of the man who had played everyone for fools. Reporters waiting outside the church swarmed forward, their microphones raised high, ready to broadcast the scandal of the year. I turned to the stunned crowd, exhaling slowly. Then with grace, I reached up and unclasped the Carter family pearls from my neck, letting them drop unceremoniously onto the altar. I won't be needing these anymore. With that, I turned, lifted my dress slightly, and strode back down the aisle, not as a bride, but as a woman who had just rewritten her own destiny. The guests murmured in shock as I passed, some applauding, some filming, and some still processing the spectacle they had just witnessed. Olivia ran after me, her face a mixture of heartbreak and admiration. Lily. She started, hesitating. I didn't know. I swear. I studied her for a moment. Unlike her brother, Olivia had never given me a reason to doubt her sincerity, and she had just lost the illusion of the brother she thought she knew. I took a deep breath. I know. Margaret followed close behind, her hands trembling. Lily, please don't leave like this. I don't know what to say. I turned to her, softening just slightly. I know you loved him, and I know you did your best to raise a good man. But Ethan made his choices, and today he faced the consequences. She nodded slowly, tears slipping down her cheeks. You were the best thing that ever happened to him. And he ruined it. Yes, I said simply. He did. Then I walked out of the church, stepping into the sunlight, free in a way I had never felt before. Tomorrow the world would know me as the woman who exposed Ethan Carter. But today? Today I was just Lily Harper, a woman who refused to be played, who chose herself over deception. And for the first time in years I knew exactly who I was. The aftermath of Ethan's public downfall rippled through the city like a shockwave. The video of his arrest at the altar had gone viral within hours. News stations dissected every detail. Social media was flooded with reactions, and my name had become synonymous with revenge served cold. I spent the first night in a luxury hotel, sipping champagne in a silk robe while watching commentators debate whether I was a hero or a villain. I didn't care about public opinion. I cared that justice had been delivered. But I underestimated one thing. Desperate men do desperate things. A late-night warning. At 2:47 a.m. my phone rang. An unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something in my gut told me to answer. Lily Harper, a gruff voice asked. Who's asking? The voice hesitated. Then, my name is Detective Nolan. I need to speak with you immediately. There's been an incident. My stomach tightened. What kind of incident? Someone tried to break into your apartment. I shot up from the hotel bed, fully awake. Excuse me. The security footage caught him in the act. Tall dark hair, wearing a hoodie. He forced the door but bolted when the alarm went off. Ethan, or someone working for him, will need you to come to the station in the morning, Nolan continued. We're increasing patrols near your residence, but I'd recommend staying somewhere secure for now. Already ahead of you. I hung up and clenched my fists. Ethan was already behind bars, but his influence wasn't. Someone had tried to get to me, maybe to scare me, maybe to take something I had. Either way, I wasn't about to be a sitting target. I needed to hit first. By sunrise, I was dressed in sleek black, my hair tied back as I walked through the heavy doors of Carter Enterprises. The boardroom was already filled when I arrived. Ethan's father, Richard Carter, sat at the head of the long glass table, his expression a thunderstorm of barely restrained fury. Margaret was there too, her hands folded in her lap, her face tired. Olivia sat beside her, stiff with tension. You've done enough damage, Lily, Richard spat the moment I walked in. Why are you here? I dropped a thick folder onto the table. To finish what I started. His fingers twitched. You ruined my son. I smiled. No, he ruined himself. I just made sure everyone saw it. The other board members shifted uncomfortably. Ethan's disgrace had left them vulnerable. Clients were pulling out. Shareholders were panicking. And I knew Richard was scrambling to do damage control. I have evidence that shows Ethan wasn't working alone, I said, flipping open the folder. Offshore transfers that weren't just his. This was systemic, and if you think I'm done exposing it, think again. Richard's face darkened. What do you want? Simple. You step down. You walk away. And Olivia takes control of the company. Margaret gasped. Olivia's eyes widened. That's absurd. Richard barked. She's just a Carter. I finished for him. A Carter who actually has morals? Olivia turned to me, stunned. You want me to take over? I nodded. You're the only one who can clean up the mess your father and brother made. Richard slammed a fist on the table. This company is mine. For now, I said smoothly. But the second I hand over this evidence to the feds, it won't be yours for long. Silence. The board members whispered among themselves, uneasy. Then finally Richard exhaled sharply. Fine. You want me out? I'm out. But don't think this is over. I smirked. Oh, I know it's not. But when you try to come after me, Richard, make sure you don't miss. With that, I turned to Olivia. Clean house. Fire anyone who was involved. And don't make the same mistakes your brother did. She gave a small, determined nod. And just like that, Carter Enterprises changed hands. As I stepped out of the boardroom, my phone buzzed. Detective Nolan again. We caught the guy, he said. And you're going to want to hear what he had to say. An hour later, I was sitting across from a scrawny, nervous-looking man in an interrogation room. He had a fresh bruise on his cheek from where he'd been tackled during his arrest. I leaned forward. You broke into my apartment. Why? The man swallowed. I wasn't going to take anything, I swear. I was just supposed to find something. I narrowed my eyes. What? He hesitated. A flash drive. My heart stopped. The flash drive. The one with backup copies of all Ethan's emails and offshore transactions. I'd hidden it in a locked safe just in case. Who sent you? I demanded. The man hesitated. I don't know his name. Just a guy. Said it was urgent. But I knew. It wasn't Ethan. It was someone bigger. Someone who was still out there. And just like that, I realized this wasn't over. Not even close. The revelation that the break-in at my apartment wasn't just an act of desperation by Ethan or one of his lackeys, but instead the work of someone more powerful, someone still lurking in the background, sent a slow, creeping chill down my spine. I sat across from the nervous man in the interrogation room, watching as he fidgeted under the harsh fluorescent lighting, his fingers twitching on the table as if he wanted to grab something, anything, to ground himself. He was scared, but not of me, not really. No, his fear was deeper than that. More rooted in something beyond my reach, in someone who had sent him on this errand knowing full well that failure would come at a steep cost. You're going to have to do better than that, I said, my voice deceptively calm, my fingers interlocked on the cold steel of the table between us. You broke into my home, went straight for something most people wouldn't even know existed, and now you're sitting in front of me acting like you were just a thief looking for quick cash. I don't buy it. Who sent you? He swallowed hard. His Adam's apple bobbing as beads of sweat gathered on his brow. I told you. I don't know his name. He was just some guy. I leaned forward slightly, my eyes never leaving his. Describe him. The man hesitated for a moment too long, his breath coming in quick, shallow bursts as though he were debating whether it was safer to risk lying to me or betraying whoever had sent him. Finally he exhaled, his shoulders sagging. Tall. Built but not overly muscular. He wore a dark suit, expensive like someone who deals with real money. I didn't see his face much. He stayed in the shadows. But his voice, it was calm, controlled, like he was used to being in charge. He didn't offer details, just gave me an address, a time, and told me to retrieve the drive. That was it. A cold weight settled in my chest. This wasn't just about Ethan anymore. This was bigger. Someone had been watching. Someone who knew that the real danger wasn't Ethan's arrest, but the secrets contained in that flash drive, the evidence I had meticulously gathered against Ethan, against his company, and against everyone who had helped him build his empire of lies. And if they wanted it badly enough to send someone into my home in the dead of night, then I had just become a bigger target than I ever realized. I stood up slowly, pushing my chair back with the scrape of metal against tile. Detective Nolan, I think we're done here, I said, turning toward the officer standing against the wall. If he remembers anything else, let me know. The detective nodded, his sharp eyes flicking between me and the suspect. We'll keep him here for now, see if he's willing to talk more. As I walked out of the station, my mind was already moving ahead, working through the tangled threads of this conspiracy. If someone else was pulling the strings, then I needed to find out who they were before they found another way to come after me. And I had an idea of where to start. The next morning I found myself standing in front of an imposing glass building in downtown Manhattan, the kind of corporate structure that housed people who moved millions with the click of a button, whose boardrooms dictated the rise and fall of entire industries. Carter Enterprises had once been part of that world, until I had burned it to the ground. Now I was about to walk straight into another viper's nest. The receptionist eyed me warily as I approached. "Do you have an appointment?" I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Tell Vincent Maddox that Lily Harper is here to see him." The woman's expression flickered just slightly, but she recovered quickly, tapping at her keyboard. A few moments later she glanced up. "Mr. Maddox will see you now." That was almost too easy. A security guard led me to the top floor, where floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city skyline, casting long shadows across the gleaming marble floors. Vincent Maddox sat behind a sleek mahogany desk, dressed in an impeccable navy suit, his silver cufflinks catching the morning light. He was older than I expected, mid-50s perhaps, with graying temples and the kind of confidence that came from years of navigating dangerous waters without ever getting his hands dirty. "Lily Harper," he greeted smoothly, rising from his chair and extending a hand. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" I didn't take it. His smile didn't falter. If anything, it grew slightly amused as he gestured toward the chair across from him. "Please have a seat." I sat, crossing my legs deliberately, my gaze locked onto his. "Let's cut the games, Vincent. I know someone tried to steal something from me last night. I also know that someone wasn't acting alone." Vincent folded his hands together, his expression carefully neutral. "And you think that someone is me?" I tilted my head slightly. "I think you know exactly who's behind it. Maybe you even gave the order yourself. But let's be clear, I don't scare easily. So if you or whoever you're working with thinks I'm just going to roll over and let you bury what I found, you're sorely mistaken." For a brief second something flickered in his eyes, an emotion I couldn't quite place. Amusement? Annoyance? Respect? Then he sighed, leaning back in his chair. "You really don't know when to stop, do you? You should know by now that I don't stop until I win." Vincent exhaled, steepling his fingers. "You're playing in dangerous waters, Lily. Ethan was a fool, but the people he was tied to, they're not. They don't like loose ends. And right now that's exactly what you are." I leaned forward. "Then let them come. Because if they try anything, I will make sure that every single one of their secrets burns for the whole world to see." Vincent studied me for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, he let out a quiet chuckle. "You remind me of someone I used to know." I didn't respond. After a beat he nodded. "Fine. I'll tell you what I know. But in return you leave this alone. You walk away before this war turns into something you can't win." I smiled, but there was no humor in it. "We'll see about that." Vincent leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping just enough to make the moment feel heavier. "Ethan wasn't the one who put the offshore accounts in place. He wasn't the one orchestrating the financial manipulation. He was just a puppet." I clenched my fists. "Then who was pulling the strings?" Vincent hesitated. Then finally he said it. "Julian Lancaster." The name hit me like a punch to the gut. Julian Lancaster. The man whose family had been quietly pulling strings in New York's financial world for decades. The kind of man whose name was never in the papers, but whose influence stretched far beyond what anyone realized. The man Ethan had once mentioned in passing as an investor in Carter Enterprises. The man who now apparently saw me as a problem. Vincent watched the realization dawn on my face, nodding slightly. "Now you understand. You didn't just take down Ethan. You disrupted something much, much bigger." A slow, determined fire lit in my chest. "Good," I said, standing. "Then I guess it's time I finish what I started." Vincent sighed, shaking his head. "I hope you know what you're doing, Lily." I met his gaze, unwavering. "I always do." As I walked out of the office, I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just about Ethan anymore. This was war. Stepping out of Vincent Maddox's office, I felt the weight of the moment settle over me like a storm cloud ready to unleash its fury. Julian Lancaster. The name alone sent a shiver of awareness down my spine. Ethan had been a fool, a reckless pawn who had played his game with arrogance and greed. But Julian? He wasn't reckless. He was precise, meticulous, a master strategist who had built an empire on shadows and silence. If he wanted something erased, it disappeared. If he wanted someone ruined, they ceased to exist in the world of power and money. And now I had made myself his problem. Good. I wasn't just going to survive this, I was going to end it. That night I didn't go home. My apartment was compromised, and I wasn't about to make it easy for Lancaster or his people to track me. Instead, I found myself in a sleek, anonymous hotel suite, high above the city, watching the lights flicker below like constellations. I had spent the last 3 years believing that Ethan Carter was the source of all the rot, but I had only been scratching the surface. The real power had been hiding just behind him, steering his ambitions, funding his deceptions, and now making me their target. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. You should have walked away when you had the chance. I smiled grimly. Me, you should have covered your tracks better. A minute passed. Then another. My heart pounded with anticipation. Unknown number. You don't understand who you're dealing with. Me neither do you. There was no response after that. But I knew Lancaster had read the message. And I knew it had hit him exactly where I wanted it to. If Lancaster wanted to get rid of me, I was going to make it the hardest mistake of his life. Over the next 48 hours, I executed the final phase of my plan, the one I had been preparing for long before I even knew Lancaster's name. Ethan had been reckless, but he had still left trails, hidden bank accounts, shell corporations, off-the-record meetings that had seemed small at the time but, when pieced together, formed a map of corruption that pointed straight to Lancaster's front door. With my private investigator's help, I had gathered enough information to make life very uncomfortable for Lancaster. Offshore accounts linked to fraud, illegal campaign contributions, money funneled through his charities that never reached the people they were meant for. And most importantly, his direct involvement in Ethan Carter's schemes. I wasn't just holding evidence. I was holding the match to an empire soaked in gasoline. And tonight I was going to light it. I knew Lancaster wouldn't sit back and wait for me to make my next move. Sure enough, the invitation arrived in the most Lancaster way possible. No threats, no direct contact, just a note left on my car windshield outside the hotel. Rooftop bar. Lancaster Tower. 9 p.m. Let's talk before you do something you'll regret. I stared at the note, my pulse thrumming in my ears. This was it. The final game. I arrived at Lancaster Tower precisely at 9 p.m., dressed in a black fitted blazer and heels sharp enough to cut through the tension. The rooftop bar was as sleek and exclusive as I had expected. Dimly lit, filled with whispers of million-dollar deals, the kind of place where power played behind closed doors. Lancaster was already waiting, sitting in a corner booth with a glass of bourbon in front of him, his expression unreadable. He looked exactly as I had imagined, polished, composed, and completely in control. But tonight I wasn't the one under his control. You've certainly made yourself a nuisance, Lancaster said as I slid into the seat across from him, his tone smooth, as if we were old friends catching up. I smirked. And you've made yourself an easy target. His lips twitched, but his amusement didn't reach his eyes. Let's not waste time with bravado, Miss Harper. You and I both know how this ends. You can still walk away. You can still disappear into a comfortable life. Let this go, and avoid making yourself a permanent enemy. I leaned forward slightly. I already have a comfortable life. And I'm not the one who should be worried about enemies. For the first time I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Calculation. A man like Lancaster didn't get rattled. He didn't get threatened. But he knew when he was facing something he couldn't completely predict. You've been busy, he admitted. Very. He took a slow sip of his drink, setting it down with measured precision. So what do you want? Money? Silence? Some sort of deal? I laughed, shaking my head. You really don't get it, do you? I don't want your money. I don't want silence. I want your world to burn. His expression didn't change, but I saw his fingers tighten around the glass just slightly. You're playing with fire. And you're drowning in it. I slid a small flash drive across the table. Everything I have on you is on here. Offshore accounts. Campaign fraud. Your connections to Ethan Carter's scheme. Your entire empire, summarized in convenient files. Lancaster glanced at it, then back at me. And what am I supposed to do with this? You. I tilted my head. Nothing. It's already been sent to the FBI, SEC, and every major news outlet in the country. For the first time, I saw Lancaster's composure crack. A fraction of a second. A single muscle twitch in his jaw. Checkmate. You think this ends with me? He asked quietly, his voice like steel wrapped in velvet. I met his gaze unwavering. I think your time is up. He exhaled slowly, then gave a small nod of acknowledgement. You really are something else, Miss Harper. And you really underestimated me, Mr. Lancaster. I stood, turning toward the exit. Enjoy your last drink as a free man. As I walked away, I didn't need to look back to know that I had one. The fallout was immediate. By morning, Lancaster's name was plastered across every news outlet. His assets were frozen. His lawyers scrambled for damage control. His carefully built empire was collapsing brick by brick. Ethan Carter had been the first domino. Lancaster had been the last. And as I stood on my hotel balcony, watching the sunrise over the city, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Freedom. I had been a woman betrayed. A pawn in someone else's game. Now, I was the one who had ended it. For good. Months later, as I sipped champagne at a gala for a women's business empowerment initiative, an event held in the same hotel where Ethan had sealed his fate, I felt a familiar presence beside me. Lily Harper, a deep voice drawled. I turned, my lips quirking at the sight of Detective Nolan. Still causing trouble? He asked, amusement in his eyes. I smirked. Always. He chuckled, shaking his head. You took down some of the most powerful men in the city. What's next? I lifted my glass, the golden liquid catching the light. Anything I want. And for the first time in my life, I knew that was the absolute truth.